What's up, TUMNAD lectures? In this video, we are going to be talking about the autonomic nervous system. It is the very first time to watch me. Please make sure you subscribe, you put on notification bell so that whenever I load a video, you become the very first one to watch. Let's go ahead and get started and look at what we call the autonomic nervous system. We previously talked about the autonomic nervous system, whereby we talked that it is going to be that system that's going to be regulating the glandular activities, the muscle activities, and even also what we call the cardiac muscles. Okay, so now this system is going to be regulating all those structures wherever they are in the whole body. Okay, and then we went ahead and said that it had three cardinal divisions. The autonomic nervous system has what we call sympathetic nervous system. It has what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, and even also enteric. It is going to be controlling all those kind of activities that we cannot control by ourselves. For that reason, it's going to be under involuntary control. Okay, but now in this kind of the study, we are going to be focusing. We want to see this kind of the parasympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Where are they going to be located? What kind of the motor fibers are going to be coming out of the central nervous system to go and innervate the effectors? That is our main target of today's video. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so now what you are seeing here is going to be a cross section of what we call the brain and then the spinal cord. We have what we call the brain and then have also a section of the spinal cord. So now we want to see the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system on the brain and the spinal cord. Where are we going to find it? Okay, so now we shall start with what we call sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system, it is that system which is going to be activated to be sympathetic with us. Whenever we are in stressful moment, whenever we are in fearful moments, this kind of system is activated such that our body gets enough energy such that either you fight or even you fly away. That's why sometimes it's even called fight or flight system. Okay, now, where are we going to find our sympathetic nervous system in the central nervous system? You know, we have what we call the spinal cord, and then the spinal cord, if you cut the cross-section of the spinal cord, you're going to be having the dorsal horn, and then the ventral horn, and then even have what we call the lateral horns for the case of the lumbar region, and then also the thoracic region. So now, we are going to be seeing the motor fibers of the sympathetic nervous system on the lateral horns of the gray matter, okay, on the cross-section of the spinal cord. If you remember very well the cross-section of the spinal cord, we had the lateral horns, okay, and these lateral horns, that's where we are going to be having the cell bodies of the sympathetic nervous system coming out from, okay. So now we want to see on which region of the spinal cord do we have those kind of the cell bodies coming out. Generally, we're going to be having it from the thoracic region and then some part of what we call the lumbar region. So we are going to be having it coming from what we call from T1, all the way from T1 down up to L2. So we are going to be having it from T1 up to T12, then from L1 up to L2. That's where you're going to be having our origin of what we call the sympathetic nervous system. Now, for that region, if it is coming from the thoracic region and then the lumbar region, collectively, we can call it thoracolumbar outflow. Okay, we can simply call it thoracolumbar outflow. Okay, thoracolumbar outflow. That's generally where we are going to be finding our sympathetic nervous system pre-ganglionic motor fibers coming out from the spinal cord, thoracic region, and then the lumbar region. Okay, so now we have a couple of the ganglia whereby these kind of the motor fibers are going to be coming and they synapse before we have the post-ganglionic fibers going to innervate different kinds of the structures all over the body. Okay, so now in sympathetic nervous system, you're going to be having a couple of ganglia. A ganglia is that collection of neuron cell bodies outside the central nervous system. That is a ganglia. So you're going to be having this kind of the ganglia, which is going to be near the vertebral column on both sides. Okay. So now that kind of the ganglia is what we call the paravertebral. Okay, paravertebral ganglia. Okay, paravertebral ganglia. Then we also have another one which is going to be in front of the vertebral column, just in front of what we call the aorta. We call that one as what we call prevertebral. Okay, we call it as prevertebral. Okay, prevertebral ganglia. prevertebral ganglia, and this one is going to be having a couple of names. Prevertebral ganglia, you may even find some other people calling it the collateral. Okay, so it has a couple of different names. Then we are also going to be having some kind of other ganglias, which are going to be what we call the cervical ganglia. Okay, the cervical ganglia. And of course, this cervical ganglia are going to be having some other preganglionic fibers coming out from the thoracic region. They come out and then they pass through this kind of the cervical ganglia, and then they go to innervate different structures of the body. Okay, so now we're going to be having cervical ganglia. We have what we call the superior, we have what we call the middle, and then also have what we call the inferior cervical ganglia. We shall look about that one when we are talking about the individual sympathetic nervous system in detail. We shall see how these kind of the ganglia are going to be acting. Okay, so now looking at what we call now the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system, it is that system which is going to be responsible for what we call rest or digest. After you have been in a stressful moment, a fearful moment, you need to rest and then digest. Okay, so now the parasympathetic nervous system is always helping us to rest and then also digest. It is also another beautiful thing. So now, on the central nervous system, where are we going to find the parasympathetic nervous system? Where is it going to be originating? The first area where the parasympathetic is going to be coming out from is what we call the brainstem. You know, the brainstem is going to be made up of the midbrain, the pons, and then the medulla oblongata. That's where we are going to be having the preganglionic fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system coming out from. Here you're going to be coming out some cranial nerves. They are going to be coming out with some cranial nerves. So now we are going to be having, you see like in the midbrain, we have this kind of this nucleus. And this nucleus is what we call the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Yes, so what we call the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. So we are going to be having now our preganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system coming out via one of the most important cranial nerve. You know this cranial nerve? This cranial nerve is what we call the third cranial nerve, and it's what we call oculomotor. Okay, it's going to be coming via what we call cranial nerve number 3. Okay, so now the preganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system will come and terminate on this ganglia. You want to know this ganglia? This ganglia is what we call the ciliary ganglion. Now, the postganglionic fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system will leave this ganglia and they go and innervate very many structures. They can innervate what we call the dilator pupillae, the ciliary muscles, bringing about what we call the pupil constriction, and even also what we call or the accommodation for the case of the ciliary muscle. This is such another beautiful thing. Okay, so now that is for the case of the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, giving us the preganglionic fibers via what we call cranial nerve number 3. Then when we come to the pons, we have, you know, this nucleus here. This nucleus is what we call the superior salivatory nucleus. It's super very important. It is going to be giving us the preganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system, going to be coming out via one of the most important cranial nerve. You know this cranial nerve? It is going to be cranial nerve number 7. Okay? It is going to be cranial nerve number 7. Okay, cranial nerve number 7. And cranial nerve number 7 is what we call the facial nerve. Okay, so now the preganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system, they come out and then they split into two. We have two kind of ganglions where we are going to be having these kind of fibers terminating. They terminate in this kind of the ganglion, which we call the submandibular ganglion, or even have some other preganglionic fibers going to synapse in what we call the pterygopalatine ganglion. And of course, now the postganglionic fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system will leave and then they go and innervate different structures. You know what? When the postganglionic fibers from the pterygopalatine, where they go? They are going to go and innervate the lacrimal glands, leading into what we call lacrimation process. Okay? And then also we have the submandibular. They will even go and innervate what we call the sublingual and then submandibular salivary glands. Okay? This is such another beautiful thing. What else? You see this nucleus? This nucleus is what we call the inferior salivatory nucleus. It is going to be giving us the preganglionic fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system coming out via one of the cranial nerve. You know this cranial nerve? This cranial nerve is what we call cranial nerve number 9. Okay, cranial nerve number 9. And what's cranial nerve number 9? It is glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, so now these preganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system, when they come out, they come and synapse on this ganglion. You know this ganglion? This ganglion is what we call the aortic ganglion, okay? And the postganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system from this ganglion, which we are calling the aortic ganglion, they will go supply different areas, preferably one of the areas which we call the parotid gland, okay? One of the major external salivary gland. This is such another beautiful thing, okay? Then we also have this kind of the nucleus here. You see this nucleus here? This nucleus here is what we call dorsal vagus nucleus or dorsal nucleus vagus. It is super very important. It's going to be giving us the preganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system. They come out with via what we call cranial nerve number 10. And cranial nerve number 10 is what we call the vagus nerve. So now, these kind of the fibers are going to go and innervate different structures of the body. They are going to be innervating a lot of other structures. They're going to be innervating the internal viscera or the visceral organs, the GIT, the respiratory tract, the lungs. It's going to be making a lot of the plexuses, okay? And then it goes and innervates all those structures. We shall have a very specific video which is going to be targeting all those areas which are going to be supplied by the parasympathetic motor fibers coming from what we call the dorsal vagus nucleus into those kind of different visceral organs. So I'll have a specific video for that. Okay. So now, where else do we have the parasympathetic nervous system coming out from? We have this area down here in the sacral region. You know, the sacral region within the intermediate gray horn. Okay. Some books, they do say that this sacral region, they do have the lateral horns, but some books, they do not say that it has a lateral horn. They say just has intermediate horns, okay? But that's why you're going to be having our motor fibers, our preganglionic cell bodies of the preganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system coming out from. So now they're going to be coming out generally from what we call S2 and then S3, also S4. So now when they come out, they are going to be coming out, and then they form what we call the pelvic splanchnic nerve. Pelvic splanchnic nerve, and this one is going to be supplying a couple of other different structures within the pelvic region, like the reproductive organs. It's going to be supplying also some part of the descending cone, the third part of what we call the transverse cone, the sigmoid column, the anus, and even also most parts are going to be supplied by this kind of the outflow from the sacral region. So now, what do we learn now? We are seeing that the parasympathetic nervous system is going to be coming from the brainstem and even also some portion of what we call the sacral region. So now, if we join this one, this is going to be now the cranial part, and this is going to be the sacral part. Collectively, we can just call it craniosacral outflow. Okay, we can just simply call it craniosacral outflow. Okay. Craniosacral outflow. So now the parasympathetic nervous system is going to be coming out of the central nervous system through what we call the craniosacral outflow. And of course, this craniosacral outflow is going to be having cranial nerve number 3, cranial nerve number 7, cranial nerve number 9. It's going to be having cranial nerve number 10, cranial nerve number 10. It's going to be having S2, going to be having S3, and even also what we call the S4. Okay, so now this is going to be now our craniosacral outflow. So now we also have some kind of the ganglia which are going to be associated with the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, you know, we are going to be looking at now the preganglionic fibers, the postganglionic fibers, and we see their difference in lengths. But generally, in parasympathetic nervous system, you are going to be having what we call the terminal ganglia. Okay, what we call the terminal ganglia, or even some people even call it because some of these ganglia can even be within the target organ, so it can also be called the intramural. Okay, so now in other words, that we are going to be having now the preganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system moving and moving and moving just near the target organ, and that's what we even called the terminal ganglion. And then sometimes even the ganglion they can even be within the target organ, and that's what we even called the intramural organs, like for example, the other kind of the ganglia which are going to be within even the target organ. Okay, so now we have now seen the origin and then some kind of the examples of the ganglia which are going to be now part of the parasympathetic nervous system and even also the sympathetic nervous system. So now let's go ahead and see the kind of the motor fibers that come out for the case of the sympathetic nervous system and then parasympathetic nervous system, because it's also super very important. Okay. Now, when you see this kind of the neuron, okay, this kind of the neuron which is going to be coming out from the lateral horn of the thoracolumbar region. Now, when you see the lengths of this kind of the neuron, okay, and then these ones, and then these ones, and then also these ones, you realize they're going to be having a very big difference, okay? But you need first to know which kind of the neuron is this. You know, this kind of the news which comes out from the lateral horns of the thoracolumbar region, they are what we call the preganglionic motor fibers. Okay, so now this neuron A is going to be now our preganglionic. Preganglionic. They are going to be preganglionic motor fibers. Okay, so now they are preganglionic motor fibers because they have not yet reached a ganglion. So now, because of that, they are now pre. And of course, those ones which are going to be coming out after the ganglion now becomes what we call the postganglionic motor fibers. Okay, so now you are seeing now this one here. This is going to be now our ganglion, and then we are going to be having now this kind of proceeding motor fiber. And this one here, which is part B, this kind of the neuron, is what we call now the postganglionic motor fibers. So now this part B is going to be now what we call the postganglionic motor fibers. Okay, postganglionic motor fibers. Okay, now we need to first see. Now this is going to be now our target organ, in meaning that in the sympathetic nervous system we are going to be seeing this kind of the postganglionic motor fibers coming to innervate the target organ. But now we need to first come and zoom out and see which kind of the neurotransmitters are going to be released by the preganglionic motor fibers and then the postganglionic motor fibers. The preganglionic motor fibers of the sympathetic nervous system, they are going to be releasing these kind of neurotransmitters which are going to stimulate the postganglionic motor fibers. And of course, the postganglionic motor fibers are going to be releasing the chemicals which goes direct and stimulate the target organ. This is such another beautiful thing. Now, which kind of the neurotransmitters do we find in this kind of this ganglion here for the case of the sympathetic nervous system? Generally, we are going to be seeing this kind of preganglionic motor fibers releasing a chemical called acetyl, which we call acetylcholine. Okay, acetylcholine. For that reason, these preganglionic motor fibers of the sympathetic nervous system are going to be cholinergic fibers. Okay, they are releasing acetylcholine. Now, how about these neurotransmitters the postganglionic motor fibers are going to release to innervate the target organ? This kind, for the case of the sympathetic nervous system, is going to be releasing a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. Norepinephrine. We even call it noradrenaline. Okay, so now that means they are going to be now the postganglionic motor fibers of the sympathetic nervous system. They are going to be more adrenergic motor fibers. Okay, this is such another beautiful thing. Now, when you see the lengths of these kind of the preganglionic motor fibers, you are going to be seeing that they are going to be short compared to the postganglionic motor fibers. Okay, the preganglionic motor fibers for the sympathetic nervous system, they come out and then synapse in different ganglion, and then the postganglionic fibers will move and move and move until it reaches what we call the target organ. This is such another beautiful thing. Okay, now coming to the parasympathetic nervous system. You realize now this kind of the motor fiber, which is going to be now the parasympathetic motor fibers. These are the ones which are going to be coming out of the central nervous system. How are we calling them? They are generally called the preganglionic motor fibers. Okay, they are called the preganglionic motor fibers. Okay, and you are seeing them, they are going to be long compared to the postganglionic fibers. So now these ones here, they are going to be long. Okay, so now these ones after the ganglion, this kind of the neurons part which we are calling the B is what we call now the postganglionic. Okay, the postganglionic motor. So now I want to see which kind of the neurotransmitters are going to be produced by these kind of the neurons. Okay, Now, which kind of the neuron do we see now the preganglionic fibers releasing in this ganglion? It is generally what we call acetylcholine. Acetylcholine. Okay, acetylcholine. This means that the preganglionic motor fibers or the parasympathetic nervous system are going to be cholinergic. Okay, so now what kind of the neurotransmitters are these postganglionic motor fibers going to release to the target organ? Same thing, acetylcholine. Okay, it's going to be releasing what we call acetylcholine. Okay, acetylcholine. So it's going to be acetylcholine, meaning that the pre and then post-ganglionic motor fibers for the parasympathetic nervous system are going to be cholinergic motor fibers. Okay, this is such another beautiful thing. Okay. So now, this is going to be now the brief introduction of the autonomic nervous system, showing the origin, the different kind of the ganglion, and then the motor fibers which come out of them and how we call them. Okay, so now when you see this kind of neuron, the postganglionic, it's going to be short. Okay, it's going to be short. So now, how is it different from the sympathetic nervous system? In the sympathetic nervous system, the postganglionic motor fibers are going to be long, but in the parasympathetic nervous system, and then for the case of the preganglionic motor fibers of the sympathetic nervous system are going to be short, and then for the case of preganglionic motor fibers for the parasympathetic nervous system are going to be long. All these ones, they play a very significant role. You know why this kind of the neuron is very long? The preganglionic is going to be moving and moving and moving until it reaches near the target organ. Okay, or even sometimes it can even be inside within the target organ. That's what we are having this kind of the ganglion, which you call the terminal, or even what you call the intramural ganglions. Okay, so now let's have just a very simple recap. We said that sympathetic nervous system, the origin is going to be thoracolumbar region, and even to be more specific, it's going to be from T1 up to L2. Okay, and we said that you're going to be having the preganglionic motor fibers going to be coming from what we call the lateral horns, okay, of the gray matter of the thoracolumbar region. Okay, they come through the ventral horn, and then they come out through what we call the ventral root, and then they become the part of the spinal nerve, and then they move and they enter into what we call the white rami communicants, and then they ascend into different ganglions. Okay, we said we even have a lot of the ganglion which are going to be part of the sympathetic nervous system, which we call the paravertebral ganglion, which may even call the sympathetic chain, or call the chain ganglia. Okay, we also have what we call the prevertebral, which are going to be in front of the vertebral column, which can even be called the collateral ganglia. It can even be called the preaortic. A couple of names which you can call that. Then we even have what we call the cervical ganglia, which are going to be located in the cervical region. We have the superior, the middle, and then the inferior ganglion. Okay, then we said that the parasympathetic nervous system is going to be coming out from what we call the craniosacral outflow. It's going to be coming from the brainstem and then the sacral region. Now we said that in the midbrain, we have this kind of the nucleus we call the Ending-Westphal nucleus, where you're going to be having the preganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system coming out with nerve number 3, which we call the oculomotor nerve. And then we said that we have a superior salivatory nucleus, whereby you have the preganglionic motor fibers coming out via what we call the coronal nerve number 7, and then they go and they synapse in different kind of the ganglion which we talked about. Then we said that we also have what we call the inferior salivatory nucleus, whereby the preganglionic motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system coming out with coronal nerve number 9, which we call the glossopharyngeal nerve. And then we talked the last data, we have this kind of the dorsal vagus nucleus, whereby we have the preganglionic motor fibers coming out, and then we shall be seeing now most important kind of the fibers going to innervate different structures all over the body. Okay, that's what we said that for the case of that one. And then we talked about this kind of the motor fiber that come out of the central nervous system. For the case of the sympathetic nervous system, we said that the preganglionic motor fiber is going to be short, and then it's going to be releasing acetylcholine. And then we said that the postganglionic motor fiber is going to be long, and it's going to be releasing noradrenaline on the target organ. Okay, for that reason, these ones are going to be cholinergic, and these ones are going to be adrenergic. And then we said that on the parasympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic motor fiber is going to be very long and releases acetylcholine. Okay, and then the postganglionic motor fibers are going to be short and they are releasing acetylcholine. So it's going to be cholinergic. Okay, this is such another beautiful thing. Okay. So that briefly covers autonomic nervous system. And in the next video, we're going to be now talking individual system, the sympathetic nervous system in great detail, and then we shall look also again another video of parasympathetic nervous system in great detail. We want to see how this kind of the chain ganglion, how they are going to be connected, and how these kind of the motor fibers move through this kind of the ganglion, the prevertebral, the paravertebral, and then even other cervical ganglions. Okay, thank you very much for watching. It has been TUMNAD as always. Until we meet next time.